Everyone in this room believes they are thinking clearly. Everyone who has ever made a catastrophic mistake believed the same thing. The most dangerous person in any situation is the one who has stopped asking whether they might be wrong. Welcome to the Stoic Compass. I am Epictetus, and today I am joined by Carl Jung and LAOZI. Today we are examining, how do you know if you're genuinely wise, or just think you are? Here is the first problem. Most people who ask this question are already using it wrong. They ask, am I wise? The way a vain person asks, am I attractive? Hoping for reassurance. The question is not a mirror for flattery, it is a test. And the test is behavioral, not philosophical. What did you do when the situation was hard? What did you do when no one was watching? What did you do when the easy choice and the right choice were not the same thing? That is your answer. Everything else is conversation.
I would push back on that immediately. The behavioral test is necessary, but it is not sufficient. A person can behave correctly and still be completely blind to their own motivations. I have sat across from patients who had done all the right things, made the responsible choices, followed the rules, performed virtue, and they were among the most unexamined people I have ever met. They had never once looked at why they behaved well. And underneath that behavior was a tremendous amount of fear, or rage, or an unmet need for approval. That is not wisdom. That is a well-managed mask.
You are both starting in the same place, which is the assumption that wisdom is something you can assess. Epictetus wants a behavioral audit. Jung wants a psychological audit. But who is doing the auditing? You are using your own mind to evaluate your own mind. That is the problem, not the solution.
That is not a problem. That is the only tool available. You use what you have. A carpenter does not refuse to work because his measuring stick was made by human hands. You examine yourself with the mind you have. You correct what you find, and you do it again tomorrow. The alternative is to throw up your hands and call everything uncertain, which is just another way of avoiding the work.
But Epictetus, there is something genuinely structurally limited about self-examination. The ego, the part of us doing the examining, has a vested interest in its own conclusions. It will look carefully at everything except the things that threaten it. That is not a failure of effort. That is how the mind is built. Wisdom, if it means anything real, has to include some reckoning with what the ego cannot see, and by definition the ego cannot see it alone.
That is closer to the actual issue. But even that framing assumes wisdom is something you arrive at through more effort, more excavation, more looking. I am not sure that is right. The people I have known who seemed genuinely clear-sighted were not people who had worked harder at self-examination. They were people who had somehow stopped insisting on a particular outcome from it.
Stopped insisting on an outcome. What does that mean in practice? You wake up, you face a decision, you need to act. Are you telling me the wise course is to have no orientation toward the result? That is not wisdom, that is drift.
I am not saying no orientation, I am saying no grip. There is a difference between knowing where you are going and being unable to change course if you are wrong. Most people who are convinced they are wise are the ones who cannot change course. They have made their map, and they are following it even when the terrain doesn't match.
That is exactly the clinical picture of what I would call inflation. The ego has identified so thoroughly with a self-image, including a self-image of being wise, that it cannot receive information that contradicts it. And the insidious thing is that inflated wisdom looks almost identical to genuine confidence from the outside. The person speaks with certainty, they have answers they do not seem to doubt. But the certainty is not the fruit of clarity, it is a defense against uncertainty.
I do not disagree that false certainty exists, I have seen it. But you are building a hall of mirrors here. If confidence can be false certainty, and doubt can be wisdom or cowardice, and self-examination can be either genuine or self-serving, how does a person take any action at all? At some point, the examination has to stop and the act has to begin. You do not improve your judgment by endlessly questioning it. You improve it by using it and being honest about what happened.
The difficulty is that most people are not honest about what happened. They are honest about the version of what happened that makes them look like they were wise. That is the not the action, the story that follows the action.
Yes, and the story is everything. The self-deceived person is not lying exactly. They genuinely believe the story. What they have lost is the capacity to notice when the story is constructed rather than observed. I have found one fairly reliable indicator of actual wisdom. How a person responds when they are shown they were wrong, not when they admit it in the abstract, when they are shown it concretely in front of other people in a way that costs them something. The genuinely wise person absorbs it, maybe not immediately, maybe not without pain, but they absorb it and update. The person who only thinks they are wise, they explain it away. They find a new angle that makes the error not an error or makes it someone else's.
That I agree with completely. And I would add, The genuinely wise person is not surprised to be wrong. They expect it. They build in the expectation that their judgment is fallible, and they watch for evidence of that fallibility. It is not pessimism, it is accuracy. The person who thinks they are wise is always slightly shocked when they are corrected, because somewhere they believed correction would not be necessary.
What you are both describing is a relationship with being wrong. Epictetus wants it to be a practice. Build in the expectation, watch for the evidence. Jung wants it to be a diagnostic. Observe how you respond when the evidence arrives. I do not disagree with either of those. I would only say that both of them assume the person is willing to not know. And most people are not. Most people want wisdom precisely because it feels like a form of security. Knowing is safer than not knowing. Being wise feels like standing on solid ground. What they do not understand is that the ground shifts constantly, and the person who has made peace with that is much harder to shake than the person who has convinced themselves they are standing on something fixed.
Peace with uncertainty is fine, but you still have to decide. You still have to choose and act. Uncertainty cannot become a permanent holding pattern. If you are waiting until you feel settled before you commit, you are not being wise. You are being paralyzed.
I do not think LAOZI is advocating paralysis. I think he is pointing at something prior to the decision. The quality of the ground from which the decision comes. A decision made from genuine uncertainty, genuinely held, is different in quality from a decision made from false certainty that has disguised itself as confidence. The behavioral outcome might look the same, but one person is navigating and one person is performing.
That is well put, and I would only add that the person who is genuinely navigating is usually quieter about it. They do not announce their wisdom, they do not refer to it. When you are actually seeing clearly, you are not thinking about whether you see clearly. You are simply looking at what is in front of you.
That is true and also convenient. It means the wisest people never make any claims, which makes it impossible to examine or verify. That protects the genuinely humble and the genuinely evasive. I need more than that. I need something I can check.
What you can check is pattern over time, not whether someone claims wisdom, not even what they say in the moment, whether they behave differently after being wrong than before, whether their errors actually change something in them or just get absorbed into the same story. That is the longitudinal test, and it is the most honest one I know.
There is one other thing worth saying. Wisdom is not a destination. That is perhaps the source of most of the confusion in this conversation. Both of you keep speaking as though there is a state called being wise that a person either has or has not reached. But it is not a place, it is a direction. The question is not whether you have arrived. The question is whether you are still moving honestly, still willing to be wrong, still looking, still willing to see the terrain as it is, rather than as your map says it should be.
I do not object to any of that. I simply insist that the direction has to be visible in behavior, not in intention, not in self-report, in what you actually did.
And I insist that what you actually did cannot be fully understood without knowing what drove it. Two people can take the same action from completely different places. The action alone does not tell you enough.
You have both been saying the same thing from different sides of the same problem, and that is fine. The listener does not need you to agree. They need to see the problem clearly enough to apply it to themselves.
Then let us say the one thing that is actually useful here and stop debating the scaffolding.
Go ahead.
Not me, you, because the thing that is actually useful is the thing you said about what happens when someone is shown they are wrong. That is the question the listener should leave with. Not am I wise? That is the vanity question. The question is, what happens to me when I am wrong?
That is the right question. Whether a person can hold it honestly is the only test worth running.
All of this argument, and we have not said the one true thing yet. Here it is.
Most people who ask whether they are wise are asking the wrong question. They are asking it about themselves, which means their ego is already in charge of the examination. And the ego has a very strong interest in passing its own test. The question that actually matters is not, am I wise? It is simpler and harder than that. What happens inside you when you discover you were wrong? Not when you admit error in the abstract. Not when you generously concede a point in a low-stakes conversation. When something you believed, really believed, and perhaps built your behavior around, turns out to be mistaken. And the cost of being wrong is real. Watch what you do then. The genuinely wise person absorbs it. Not comfortably, not instantly, but something in them updates. They let the information change them, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it requires dismantling something they were proud of. The person who only thinks they are wise explains it away. They find a frame that preserves the original conclusion, They locate the error outside themselves. You do not have to guess which one you are. You have already been wrong about something important. You already know how you handled it. That is your data. Today, try this. Think of one moment in the past year when you were clearly wrong about something. Not trivially, but in a way that mattered. Write down honestly what you did with that information. Did it change anything? Or did you fold it into a story that kept you intact? You do not have to share the answer. You just have to be honest about what it is.
The question was never whether you are wise. The question is whether you are still capable of being changed by the truth. That capacity is not permanent. It erodes. Every time you fold a real mistake into a comfortable story, the erosion gets a little worse and a little harder to see. You cannot declare yourself wise, but you can decide right now to be the kind of person who does not look away. That is the only path there is. Take it or do not. If today's conversation has served you, take it further. Pay Attention by C. Tribune. 12 Lessons in the Practice of Seeing Clearly. Available now on Amazon.